On my wedding day, my aunt stood up and yelled, "I was supposed to marry your husband, not you." My husband smirked and said, "Then you'll love this announcement." She turned pale when he said, "I never thought my wedding day would turn into a scene straight out of a soap opera, but here we are." I was standing at the altar, staring at my soon-to-be husband, heart pounding with excitement and love, when my aunt, my own flesh and blood, stood up and ruined everything. "I was supposed to marry your husband, not you," she screamed. The entire church went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. People turned their heads, eyes wide, whispering to each other in disbelief. My mom gasped so loudly I actually flinched. My dad looked like he was about to have a stroke. And me? I just stood there, frozen, my brain short-circuiting. But the worst part? The part that made my stomach twist into knots? My husband, no, the man I was about to marry, didn't look shocked. He didn't look confused. He didn't even deny it. Instead, he smirked. And then, in the calmest voice ever, he said, "Then you'll love this announcement." My aunt's face went from furious red to absolute white. At that moment, I knew. I knew something was horribly wrong. Rewind to how it all started, I should have seen the red flags. Maybe they weren't bright red at the time, maybe they were just pink, waving faintly in the distance, but they were there. I met Alex 5 years ago. He was charming, funny, the kind of guy who could make friends with anyone. We met at a charity event in Chicago, one of those fancy dinners where people pretend to care about a cause while sipping expensive wine. He sat next to me, made a joke about how overpriced the food was, and I laughed. That laugh turned into a conversation, and that conversation turned into 5 years of dating, moving in together, and planning a wedding. My aunt, Catherine, was always around. She wasn't much older than me, only 12 years. She was my dad's younger sister, the oops baby of the family, and because of the small age gap, she was more like a cousin than an aunt. She had always been the fun one, the one who took me shopping, helped me sneak out for parties in high school, let me cry on her shoulder after my first heartbreak. She was the aunt everyone loved, vibrant, loud, a little wild, but always there when you needed her. But as I got older, I started to notice things. How her hugs with Alex would linger a little too long. How she laughed at every single joke he made, no matter how dumb. How she always had an opinion on our relationship. "Are you sure you want to marry him?" she asked me once, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. Marriage is a lot of work. A lot of sacrifice. At the time, I thought she was just being protective. I thought she was looking out for me. I was so wrong. Back to the wedding day, I stood there in my wedding dress, sweat prickling at my back despite the air conditioning, as Alex smirked at my aunt like he was enjoying some inside joke. Then he dropped the bombshell. "I was never supposed to marry her either," he said, tilting his head toward me. "Because we're getting married." I swear, my vision blurred. It was like my brain just refused to process what I had just heard. The words didn't make sense. They didn't fit into my reality. Catherine staggered. Like she physically stumbled back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The gasps from the guests were deafening. People were whispering, muttering, some even standing up from their seats, not sure whether this was real or some twisted joke. I looked at Alex, my fiancé, my almost husband, my traitor, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. He wasn't regretful. He wasn't ashamed. He was proud. "You should have seen your face," he chuckled, shaking his head like this was funny. Like my entire world wasn't crumbling around me. That's when I knew. This wasn't some last-minute decision. This wasn't a mistake. This had been planned. For how long? I turned to Catherine, my chest rising and falling so fast I thought I might pass out. She looked like she was about to be sick. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice suddenly smaller, weaker. Not the loud, confident woman I had grown up with. "You don't have to pretend anymore, babe," Alex said, his tone mocking, like he was playing with her. "You wanted me, right? Well, now you have me." Catherine's eyes darted around the room, realizing, too late, that she wasn't in control of the situation. And I was done. I ripped off my veil, my hands shaking so hard I could barely breathe. My heartbeat was thundering in my ears. My fingers were tingling. My lips felt numb. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to hurt them both. But more than anything, I wanted answers. I turned to Alex, my voice shaking. "How long?" He smirked. "Does it matter? Does it matter? Does it matter?" I lunged at him. I don't know what came over me. 1 second, I was standing there, my entire world shattering around me. The next, I was lunging at Alex like a wild animal. I didn't care that I was in a wedding dress. I didn't care that there were 100 people watching. I didn't even care that my father had just shouted my name in a panic. I grabbed Alex by the collar and yanked him forward so hard he almost lost his balance. "How long?" I screamed, my voice echoing through the church. I must have looked insane, my veil hanging off one side of my head, my makeup probably smudged, my entire body trembling with rage. But I didn't care. Alex had the nerve to smirk again, but this time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, just for a second. Fear. Not because he was afraid of me, but because the game he had been playing had just spun out of his control. Catherine, on the other hand, looked wrecked. Her hands were shaking, her eyes darting between Alex and me like she was trapped. Like she knew something I didn't. And that's when I realized she wasn't in on this. At least, not in the way I thought. She had feelings for him. That much was obvious. Maybe even an affair. But she wasn't expecting this. She wasn't expecting him to humiliate her too. And suddenly, it all clicked. Alex had been playing both of us. Not just me. Not just her. The confession that changed everything before I could open my mouth again, my father stepped in. And when I say stepped in, I mean he stormed the altar like a man on a mission. My dad was not a small man. He was ex-military, broad-shouldered, and had that permanent serious look that made people stand up straighter around him. He grabbed Alex by the arm and yanked him backward like he was a disobedient child. "What the hell is going on here?" my dad growled, his voice like thunder. And for the first time, Alex lost the smirk. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something, but Catherine, my traitor of an aunt, beat him to it. She started, but then she broke. Right there. Right in front of everyone. Tears streamed down her face. She swayed, grabbing the back of a chair to keep herself upright. Then, in a voice so small, so shattered, she whispered, "He told me you didn't love him." My stomach dropped. "He told me you were only with him for stability. That you didn't want him like I did." Her lips quivered as her gaze met mine. "He said he loved me, but he was too afraid to call off the wedding because of your family. That you'd ruin him if he left you." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I turned to Alex, waiting for him to deny it. To say something, anything. But he just sighed. And then, in the most casual tone ever, he shrugged. "Well," he said, "that's not completely false." I saw red. The whispers turned into outright shouting. Guests were standing, moving, judging. Some looked horrified. Others? Entertained. Like this was some real-life drama they had front-row seats to. My mother was gripping her chest like she was about to faint. My father looked like he was debating whether to punch Alex or strangle him. But Catherine? She looked like she was finally seeing him. The real him. And she wasn't the only one. The other woman, before I could even think of what to do next, another voice rang out. "I guess now's the perfect time to tell you then." The church doors creaked open. And in walked a woman I had never seen before. Tall. Beautiful. Very pregnant. The entire room gasped. "Alex?" For the first time all day, he looked scared. The woman walked right up to him, crossed her arms over her swollen belly, and said, "You're an idiot if you thought I wouldn't show up." The moment it all unraveled, the silence was deafening. Alex was frozen. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like he was searching for an excuse that didn't exist. Catherine backed away, her eyes darting between the woman and Alex like she was going to be sick. And me? I just stared. At her. At him. At my entire damn life falling apart in front of an audience. The woman, whoever she was, let out a breath and rubbed her belly. "Well," she said, turning to me, her eyes softening. "I think I just ruined your wedding. Sorry about that." Then, looking back at Alex, she grinned. "But don't worry. I brought receipts." And with that, she pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and pressed play. And the second I heard Alex's voice come through the speakers, I knew. This wasn't over yet. The truth unfolds. The recording played loud and clear in the silent church, the speakers on her phone amplifying every disgusting, betraying word. Alex's voice, "You don't get it, do you? She's just a placeholder. Marrying her means stability, access, money, everything I need. But you're different. You're the one I actually want." My breath hitched. "Once we're married, I'll figure something out. Divorce her in a year or two, make it look like it was mutual. But for now, I need you to be patient." A wave of nausea crashed over me. The room exploded into chaos. Gasps, shouting, outrage. Catherine staggered back like she'd been shot. Her face twisted in horror, her breathing erratic. "You told me," she choked out, pointing at Alex with a trembling hand. "You told me you loved me." The pregnant woman, who still hadn't introduced herself, just laughed. A cold, bitter laugh. "He told me that too." She turned to the audience, addressing them like she was giving a TED Talk. But guess what? That's not even the best part. My heart stopped. What more could there possibly be? She clicked on her phone again, swiped through her messages, then held it up for everyone to see. There, in black and white, were screenshots of messages between her and Alex. Explicit messages. Love letters. Hotel confirmations. Even Oh God. A paternity test. A paper stating that Alex was 99.9% confirmed as the father of her child. The church erupted. People screamed. My mother collapsed into a pew, sobbing. My father? He lunged. The father versus the fraud. I had never seen my dad move so fast in my life. 1 second, he was standing beside me, breathing heavily like he was trying to keep himself from snapping. The next, he had Alex by the throat. The choking sound that came out of Alex's mouth was almost satisfying. You little piece of, my father didn't even finish. He slammed Alex against the altar with so much force that the wooden structure shook. People gasped. Some tried to pull my dad away, but he was seething. His whole body shook with barely contained rage. You thought you could play my daughter? You thought you could use her? My father's voice was deadly calm, the kind of voice that made people shrink. Alex struggled, gasping for air, his face turning red. He didn't. He coughed, clawing at my dad's hand. Didn't mean. A new voice cut through the tension. Oh, you meant every damn word. It was Catherine. And she wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't shaking. She looked furious. The woman scorned Catherine stepped forward, her expression unreadable. She looked at the pregnant woman, then at me, then at Alex, the man who had just ruined 3 lives in one go. Then, without warning, she slapped him. Hard. The crack of her palm against his cheek echoed through the church. Alex let out a pained grunt, his head snapping to the side. His cheek was already turning red. You used me, Catherine whispered, her voice low and venomous. You used both of us. The pregnant woman nodded. And me. Catherine let out a bitter laugh, running a shaking hand through her hair. God. I actually thought we had something. Her voice broke for a second, but she swallowed it down. I gave up so much for you. I risked everything. I could see it in her eyes, the realization. She had thought she was different. That she was special. She wasn't. Neither was I. Neither was the other woman. To Alex, we were all just pieces on a chessboard. Something in Catherine snapped. Before anyone could react, she reached into her purse, pulled out a glass of champagne from the reception table, and threw it directly into his face. Gasps. Sputtering, Alex wiped his face, blinking through the liquid dripping from his hair, his face contorted in shock. What the hell? But Catherine wasn't done. She grabbed the nearest wedding cake knife. The entire church screamed. The ultimate betrayal. For a moment, I thought she was going to stab him. Honestly, I wouldn't have stopped her. But instead, she turned to me. Her chest heaved. Her fingers gripped the knife so tight her knuckles were white. Then, in the most shocking twist of all, she dropped the knife and fell to her knees. At my feet. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice hoarse. I stared down at her, my mind racing, my emotions everywhere. After everything, after all the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, was this a real apology, or just another part of the game? And then, another voice spoke up. From the back of the church. A voice I hadn't heard in years. Well, the voice drawled, isn't this just a mess? Every single head turned. And my blood ran cold. Because standing there, dressed in an expensive suit, arms crossed, watching the chaos with an amused smirk, was my ex-fiancé. The man I had left for Alex. And suddenly, I had a feeling the story wasn't over yet. The past comes knocking. A stunned silence fell over the church. I felt like I had been sucker punched. Standing in the doorway, looking every bit like he belonged in a courtroom instead of this nightmare of a wedding, was Daniel, my ex-fiancé. The man I had left for Alex. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. I hadn't seen Daniel in almost 6 years. The last time we spoke, I was breaking off our engagement, telling him I'd fallen in love with someone else. With Alex. And now, here he was, watching as my world crumbled at my feet. A new twist in the game. Daniel stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He didn't look furious. He didn't look smug. He just looked amused. Like he had expected this. Well, he said, adjusting his cufflinks. I guess I should be the last person to say, I told you so, but he shrugged. I told you so. A fresh wave of shame rolled over me. My father, who still had a death grip on Alex, whipped his head toward Daniel, narrowing his eyes. What the hell are you doing here? Daniel smirked. Oh, I just happened to be in town. And when I heard that my ex was getting married to this guy, he flicked a disgusted glance at Alex. I thought I'd drop by. You know, see how it all turned out. He shoved his hands into his pockets, his gaze settling on me. Didn't expect it to be this much of a train wreck though. Even for you. My breath hitched. Even after all these years, Daniel knew exactly where to hit. And he was right. This was my fault. I had thrown away a good man for Alex. I had chosen this. And now? I was paying the price. The final blow. Catherine suddenly let out a hysterical laugh. A laugh that sent chills down my spine. She wiped her face, smearing her makeup, and shook her head. God. I was so stupid. She looked at Alex, her expression twisted with rage and heartbreak. I gave up everything for you. I lied for you. I risked my family for you. And for what? So you could string me along while knocking up some random woman. The pregnant woman scoffed. Not random. She held up her left hand, and my stomach dropped. There, on her finger, was a ring. A wedding ring. I'm his wife. The church exploded. More gasps. More whispers. Catherine's knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of a pew, my vision swimming. Alex was married. This whole time, while he was playing me, playing us all, he had a whole damn wife. And the worst part? He never looked sorry. Not even once. Alex's true colors, are you even capable of telling the truth? I whispered, my voice shaking. Alex rolled his eyes. Oh, don't act like you're innocent in all this. I blinked. What? He scoffed. You're just as bad as me, sweetheart. You think I forgot how we got together? You were engaged to this guy. He nodded toward Daniel, and you left him for me. My blood turned ice cold. You're no victim, Alex sneered. You just don't like that it's happening to you this time. The church fell silent. The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. Daniel didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Because Alex was right. I had done this before. I had betrayed someone who loved me. And now, I was on the other side of it. The shame was unbearable. Alex turned to the pregnant woman, his wife, and gave her an annoyed look. What do you want, Rachel? You could have handled this privately. Rachel smirked. Oh, sweetheart, I don't do private. She gestured to the room. Now everyone knows what kind of man you are. So, congratulations. You've officially lost everything. I expected him to fight back. To make some excuse. Instead, he just laughed. Like this was all a joke to him. Like none of us ever meant anything. I felt like I was going to be sick. Catherine turned to me, her face full of exhaustion and regret. What do we do now? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then I turned to my father. Let him go. My father hesitated, his fists clenched. But after a long moment, he released Alex with a shove. And I walked up to the man I had once thought I'd spend my life with. I loved you, I whispered. Alex smirked. I know. I slapped him. The force of it turned his head. I turned to Catherine. You coming? She looked at Alex one last time, then back at me. And for the first time, we weren't enemies. We were just two women who had been played. She nodded. Together, we walked out of the church. Without looking back. It took me a long time to heal from that day. The humiliation. The betrayal. The lesson. But I learned something. I learned that karma is real. And that sometimes, life will put you through hell just to teach you a lesson. Daniel and I never got back together. And I don't blame him. I hurt him once, and I had to live with that. As for Alex? Last I heard, his wife left him. Catherine cut him off. He lost his job after word got out about his affairs. Now, he's just another cautionary tale. And me? I'm finally free. I don't know what comes next. But for the first time in a long time, I like not knowing.